I am still working on a city exploration game that takes place in a huge procedural city, and I am aiming for a truly massive city. Right now it's 20 by 20 kilometers in size, but it's configurable so it has the potential to be even larger. I've already explained the reasons for such a massive scale in my other videos, so go check them out if you're curious. But what makes it possible is the system of fractal-like nested objects that dynamically generate layers of increasing detail the closer they are to the player. All of them use seeded random rolls, which means that each location is generated exactly the same every single time, creating the illusion of persistence. This effectively means that my city can be as detailed as I want without taking up a whole lot of resources. So now that I've put all the macro objects in place, such as buildings, parks, rivers and roads, I can start filling it with small but essential details like street props and small interactive objects. Let's start with how I create the street props. Their purpose is to fill most of the empty space between the buildings, but also leave enough sidewalk space for the player and the future NPCs to move around. So the way I decided to approach this task is by finding the sidewalk segments between the buildings and iterating through them, filling the closest ones to the player with detail. I already have an algorithm that finds non-overlapping segments between building rectangles. I wrote it to spawn the roads and rivers, but thanks to the fractal structure of the city, I can use the same one on a smaller scale to create these side streets. Using this algorithm, I can easily find sidewalks and side street segments and make sure they don't overlap. Once the segments are found, I can turn them into rectangles with the right width and orientation. Then, once I know the dimensions and orientation of each side street, I can start spawning items on it. I try to make this process general enough so I can easily add or remove items that I want to spawn. Oh, and most of the random rolls for these small streets are tied to the parent block to make sure the streets on the same block have the same style and color palette. But the particular objects are rolled for each street individually, so their arrangements don't repeat. For each of these street segments, the first order of business is to decide whether the street will have center elements. For now, the only center elements I have are the planters and the advertising billboards, but I will be adding more. So I check that the street is wide enough, then spawn a center element with a certain probability. Once the center is filled, assuming there's enough space, I can spawn the side elements. The side elements are more varied and include stuff like trash cans, benches, plants, and whatever else you could find on the side of the street. I pick one end of the street and start spawning them in a row from there. To make their placement look more organic, I try to vary their spacing and offset. At the same time, I place similar objects with similar offsets, so that, for example, if a street has multiple benches, they are always positioned along the same line, like real benches usually are. The overall result looks quite plausible to me, but if you think I missed some details, please let me know in the comments. One thing still missing from the streets though is garbage and signs of decay like cracks, dust and graffiti. But I want to add these things separately as I want all garbage and wear and tear to be a part of the same decay system and be configurable together, so I can change them for specific locations. I want it to be part of the gameplay where the player can see a neighborhood, a street, or an interior gradually fall into ruin or get cleaned up based on their actions. The next and probably final level of detail that I want to add are the small interactive items throughout the city, like food on tables, papers on desks, laptops, books, etc. They will spawn in pretty much every type of location, be it park, interior, street, or rooftop. So the system that spawns them should be general enough. Thankfully, I already have a general spawner that places furniture and the props in all of those places, so I can use it as the starting point. Now the challenge here is that I want a relatively high density of these items, so I need to be careful to only spawn them where I need them and destroy the ones I don't need quickly. The way I tackle this is by creating an item spawner class that is attached to each space that handles the spawns and despawns of the items within that space. It is activated by distance, so you'd have to come pretty close to a space to activate the spawner within it, but the spaces include pretty much every traversable location, namely the streets, parks, interiors, rooftops, and terraces. So all of them would have interactive items appropriate for that space. Now the question is, how do I know where exactly to spawn the items? Easy. As the space is generated, every piece of furniture registers a spawn point, if it has one. The spawn points on the furniture are placed manually, although not all of them may be active at a time. This is how the spawner class has the information about every item spawn point within its space. So at every moment in time, it can decide whether to spawn or destroy items based on each spawn point's distance to the player. Also, I should mention that each spawn point can spawn multiple items in different arrangements. For example, this table here is just one spawn point, but it's set to create multiple items with certain probabilities. Unlike the other props and objects around the city, these items can be interacted with. They can be grabbed, dropped, thrown, and broken. This is all in VR, of course, but the flat screen interactions will function similarly. I will probably make another video on how I make all these interactions work without tanking the performance, and how I translate VR mechanics to flat screen. You might be wondering, if they are spawned and despawned based on player proximity, can an item be taken out of a space and carried somewhere else? The answer is yes, and there is another system responsible for recording the player's interactions with the world. The way it works is every item in the game world has a unique ID tied to its seed and the seeds of its parents. And once the player interacts with it in any way, either by using their hands or tossing another item at it, the interaction gets recorded and stored in the save game. So if you take an item out of an interior and carry it to the other side of the city, it'll stay there. The interior will no longer spawn that particular item, and instead it will be spawned at the location where you left it. This way, I don't need to store any information about the game world, except the modifications made by the player. This approach is very efficient for maintaining the illusion of persistence while saving resources. Although I don't have a whole lot of variety in these interactive items yet, because I've been focusing mainly on their mechanics, they will eventually have more functionality than just decoration. I can spawn quest items, secrets and collectibles among them after all. But for now, they are just a fun way to add immersion. By the way, I will be releasing a demo of the interactive city soon, so don't forget to wishlist and follow Vantra City on Steam.